So I made a video yesterday, and in that video I made some sort of catty recollection of things that my mother did when I was a child. And later, after posting that video, I worried if my story could feel insensitive to somebody who felt like they had a more severe injury in their childhood. Like an essay or something. But I've done a lot of thinking about it, and I thought I would share what I came to. Trauma does not look the same from every perspective. In fact, trauma is quite different for everyone. There are many things that can harm someone, especially a child with a developing brain. I never suffered from anything like SA, all right? But what I suffered from, I would consider a form of severe and emotional neglect. My father was a good provider and a loving man, a loving provider. He's a loving provider, But what that meant for my reality as a child, and my mom started to stay home when I was born and not work. So she raised me, and the reality was my dad went to work all day, and where he worked was like an hour almost from where we lived, so he had to commute. And he would leave for work most days before I was awake or as I was getting up. And he would come home at night as I was going to bed. So it didn't matter that my father was a loving provider, because my father wasn't the one raising me. My mother was. And my mother was a narcissistic mother. And the world revolved around her. She was always the victim of everything, of every situation, and she was so hypercritical of everyone and everything. My therapist asked me a question one time that just blew my mind, because I had never considered this. She asked me what feeling I remember, what emotion or I remember feeling most in my childhood when I think about my childhood. And it was so perfectly obvious to me out the gate. I knew the answer. It was on the tip of my tongue. My childhood was a perfect mixture of two things. It was either absolutely lonely and silent. The silence in the house was quite deafening when I was there alone with my mother, because when I was there alone with my mother, I was condemned to my room in silence out of fear for what came the other 50% of the time, which was her explosive behavior, which often involved throwing things and breaking things and screaming obscenities. And she would do it in public. And you can see even now as I talk about it on camera how much damage it actually did, because what it left me with was a woman that I was trying to maintain a bond with, who quite literally hated and resented everyone around her, including her own daughter. So when I talk about everybody having different trauma, I am very sensitive to there being many kinds of abuse. I don't want to offend anyone, actually, but the abuse of a narcissistic mother on her daughter is very cold and calculated, and it is solely aimed at letting that little girl know that she is quite literally a source of pain, discomfort, my mother felt so wounded by everyone. I think she was just screaming out on the inside, like she needed therapy badly, and she never would go. She said to me when I was like 17 or so, I was living with my dad. My dad did get custody eventually of me, guys. Look, he didn't know how she was treating me, not really. He knew how she treated him when he came home at night and she was drunk and screaming and breaking things, but I would be upstairs in my bedroom like asleep while that was happening. But I usually would actually be hiding in my closet. And he knew that she treated him that way, but he couldn't comprehend that abuse was, he just didn't know the amount of neglect that was happening. And then when they got divorced, he didn't realize how much of that abuse would just quite literally immediately get transferred and focused onto me for the next couple of years until he did get full custody. But she literally told me when I was like 17, And I had started going to therapy. And this therapist, literally like the first therapist, I've seen many therapists, and all of them have confirmed unequivocally that my mother was a narcissist. And one of those psychiatrists actually had spoken with my mother because he's part of the reason that my dad was able to get custody of me. So when I started like going to therapy because I really started experiencing problems, like emotional issues, my mother was so angry at me. She was so angry that I was going to go to therapy. She started screaming at me on the phone. I remember it was like, I even remember where I was standing when I had this conversation with her, and she was just screaming at me about, how dare I go to therapy? She said, I'm the wounded bird, not you. Quote, that's what she said to her 17-year-old daughter or something like that started going to therapy. You're not the wounded bird, I am. She said, you don't need therapy. Why are you going to therapy? She was so fucking offended by me going to therapy. Look, complex trauma almost always has its origin wounds and like mommy and daddy issues. And it is my personal opinion that they are some of the most difficult wounds to heal from, because it's almost like they damage your soul before it even has a chance to develop. You are never able to develop a sense of self because you're so controlled and criticized. You're not allowed to have a personality. So you can kind of see how I turned into an addict, because I quite literally needed a social lubricant. And before it was, if it wasn't going to be heroin, it would have been alcohol. Like I could have seen myself going there, because I've never been what I would call an alcoholic, but like, well, I have, I guess on paper, because I've binge drank to the point of blackouts, right? So, but my issue was with binge drinking. Like, I was never somebody that drank alcohol all the time. It was just that when I did, I would like drink to intense intoxication intentionally for sedation, because I guess I learned at some point that sedation felt better than having to float through society, climb through society acting like I had a personality, because I actually had no fucking clue who I was. And I would like cling to things that other people liked, like it was my own interest or hobby, because I was so unsure of myself. When I discovered opiates, it was over because, everyone always asks why opiates. For me, it wasn't about pain. People were like, oh, emotional blunting, numbing. Sure, maybe. But for me, it was quite literally about one thing, and it only ever was, and it was about sleeping. It was about trying to sleep through life. Like, I really was contemplating if I wanted to stick around on the planet. All right, I'll say that. But I didn't have the guts to do anything but just take a whole lot of drugs. So that's what I did. And yeah, I guess that's how I got addicted to heroin. Like, it was pretty simple. Those old ads that they used to make, those drug ads, like, actually I don't even know who made them, like if it was Dare or some other organization, but they had this ad written on like a hippie flower in like a surfing magazine or a skating magazine that I was reading that said, heroin, you'll never have a high as good as your first, but feel free to die trying. And I shit you not, I fucking tore that ad out and put it on my bulletin board and like decided that day as like a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old that I was going to try and find heroin one day. And like 5 years later, I did. The very first place I went to where I knew it was, it wasn't intentional. Like, I didn't know. I went over, I got into a fight with my boyfriend, and I drove over to a friend's apartment, and I didn't announce myself. Like, I had called before coming, but when I got there, he didn't answer the door, so I walked in, and I walked through a room, and there were like people just like openly using drugs. And I should have run for my life, but that's not what happened. I was like, oh man, like, how much, And that was just basically the end of my story from there. It was like, I just want to sleep through life. And it's actually really, really sad. It's really sad, and it's why it's so, so, so important for me to get my shit together. Because my mother quite literally had the setup for an amazing life. She had it all. She had the husband, the house, the kids, like, that she wanted the kid. But, like, she literally burned down her own life, and it was quite literally the most tragic thing I've ever seen. It was and is still so sad to recall the downfall of my mother. All right, I think that's enough for this video. I'm I'm feeling okay today. I don't know if I'm feeling as good as I felt yesterday. I say that because I've got like some temperature issues going on. It seems like it only takes like a 1 degree temperature shift, or like, a half a degree temperature shift for me to either start sweating or shivering. So that's not good. And that's definitely from the methadone. But I go to the clinic tomorrow or Monday to pick up my take homes, and I am not gonna go down. I'm gonna stay right here. Yeah. I gotta stay right here for at least another week or two. I mean, I gotta stay right here until I get my emotional self in order, because I feel like that's been my biggest complaint lately, is how I've felt like I've just felt so unmotivated and so fatigued, like I have no energy to get things done. And I'm getting things, I'm managing somehow, some way to get the things done, but I'm telling you, it feels like every day I'm just barely scraping by. Like, it's just it doesn't take much of an energy shift for me to just like start crying about something, or just have these really intense emotions. And that is from the methadone, like point blank, period. It's from coming off the methadone. So I can't just be walking around crying all the time. Like, I need to give myself a break, but it's really hard. It's so hard for me to stall my taper on this medication that I am so anxious to be off of. I just don't want this drug in my body anymore. I don't want to be dealing with the side effects. I don't want to be having to take the blood pressure medication from the taper to make the taper better, that then makes me feel like crap, and then they've got to give me like Visceral so that I can sleep. I mean, it's just, and then propranolol for my heart. Like, I don't want to be on all that medication. Not at my age. I don't know why, it just doesn't feel safe for me. And like, that was one of the big things about this last relapse. When I came out of it and came into recovery, I very much felt lucky to be alive and felt like I didn't have another relapse in me. Like, an addict cannot say, I've now learned that they won't ever relapse, but like, I felt like do I have another recovery in me, you know? Because like, it's so hard. So I feel like that put a really negative spin on things, but it's maybe a really, really ugly reality, and a stark, harsh, violent reminder to fucking keep myself clean. What's out there now isn't even what I was taking back in the day that felt good. Like, it's scary, man. All right. I'll check in with you guys again sometime soon. And I hope you all have a good weekend.